Imagine raising your only son with your bare hands, feeding him from the same pot that carried your sacrifices, your prayers, and your very survival, only to have his wife throw you out of her kitchen like a stranger. But what she didn't know was that inside that pot lay a secret that could change everything. A secret that would bring her pride crashing down and make her husband see his mother in a light he would never forget. Hello, beautiful people. You made it here for a reason, so don't stop now. Hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to see how far this story of revenge will travel. It happened in our suburban Illinois house, just as the first winds of winter brushed through Chicago's streets. The sky was gray, the kind of gray that presses against your spirit, but inside the house, the oven's warmth filled the air with the scent of collard greens and smoked turkey necks. I had always believed that food was more than survival. It was legacy, memory, and sacrifice mixed together in cast-iron pots passed down from our grandmothers. But my daughter-in-law, Tasha, didn't see it that way. She stood tall in that kitchen, her bright red nails gripping the marble countertop, her voice sharp as glass when she shouted, "Get out of my kitchen!" My son, Jordan, froze where he stood, his tall frame caught between us like a bridge that didn't know which land it belonged to. And me? I stood there holding the wooden spoon I'd carried since my mother gave it to me decades ago, my hand trembling as though she'd just ripped the last piece of dignity from me. The neighbors outside shoveled snow, unaware that inside this warm house, a storm was tearing apart a family. I didn't speak at first. Silence felt safer. My eyes moved to the pot simmering on the stove, the pot that held more than just food. It held secrets, sacrifices, and a truth I prayed no one would ever need to see. But Tasha, with her perfect hair and designer apron, slammed the cupboard door so hard it rattled the glass. "I told you before, Mama Jordan," she said, refusing to call me by my real name, Deborah. "This is my house, my kitchen. You don't belong here." My chest burned, not just from humiliation but from the memory of how many nights I had stood in kitchens far smaller than this, cooking with nothing but determination to feed a hungry boy after working 2 jobs. My son's eyes flickered between me and his wife. I could see the hesitation, the fear of confrontation, the same fear that had kept him silent in other moments when Tasha's tongue cut me down. But this time, something inside me shifted. I placed the spoon down slowly, deliberately, and whispered, "One day, Jordan, you will look inside that pot, and you will understand everything." To understand the weight of that moment, you must know where I came from. I was born on the south side of Chicago, raised in a 2-bedroom apartment where the roaches marched like soldiers and winters meant piling coats on top of each other in bed because the heat bill hadn't been paid. My mother was a cleaner, her hands cracked from bleach and cheap soap, but she always kept one thing sacred, her kitchen. It didn't matter if the cupboards were nearly empty. She would stretch rice with beans, or make cornbread from scratch, filling the apartment with warmth. That's where I learned the power of food. How it could heal, comfort, and even carry unspoken love. When Jordan was born, I vowed he would never go hungry the way I did. I worked in diners and fast food joints, flipping burgers by day, cleaning offices by night. I saved every dime, hiding small bundles in the same pot I cooked with, because banks laughed at women like me. That pot was more than steel. It was my bank, my diary, my secret. And that very pot sat on Tasha's stove the day she threw me out. When Jordan met Tasha, I prayed for joy. Every mother dreams of her son finding a good wife, someone who would respect his roots, honor his family, and share in the struggles that molded him. At first, she seemed perfect. Polished, educated, a nurse at one of the best hospitals in Illinois. She smiled sweetly, kissed my cheek, and brought me flowers on Mother's Day. But slowly, cracks appeared. She didn't like the way I seasoned my food. She wrinkled her nose at collard greens, said fried chicken was too greasy, and called cornbread country food. She wanted quinoa, kale salads, and roasted salmon with lemon zest. I tried to adapt, tried to cook her way, but the flavors always tasted like emptiness on my tongue. And every time Jordan praised her cooking over mine, I felt another piece of our history slipping away. The kitchen became her territory, and I became a stranger in the very place I once ruled with pride. That December evening, the final straw snapped. I had been preparing a meal for Sunday dinner, a tradition Jordan and I kept even after he married. It was my way of keeping us close. But Tasha stormed in, her voice laced with irritation. "I told you to stay out of here. You don't respect boundaries, and I'm tired of it." Her words sliced deeper than any knife in the drawer. My son stepped forward, his hand half raised as if to defend me, but then he let it fall, his eyes dropping to the floor. That silence hurt worse than her shouting. I picked up my purse, but before I left, I turned to him, my voice steady though my heart shook. "Jordan, I raised you with these hands, fed you from this pot when no one else cared. One day, when you lift that lid, you'll see what a mother's love really looks like." Then I walked out, leaving behind the simmering aroma of collard greens and the heavy silence of a house divided. When I stepped out into the icy Illinois air that night, the cold didn't sting as much as the words that still echoed in my ears. "Get out of my kitchen." My kitchen had never been about walls or appliances. It was about the love I poured into every dish. I walked down the block, past houses with twinkling Christmas lights, each one glowing like a reminder of families gathering without conflict. I thought of the days when Jordan was small, when I would walk through the snow with him bundled in hand-me-down coats, his tiny hands gripping mine. We'd come home, thaw our frozen fingers over a bowl of steaming gumbo, and laugh at the frost that clung to our hair. Back then he used to say, "Mama, when I grow up, I'll buy you the biggest kitchen in Chicago, just for you." And here we were, in a house he had bought, with a kitchen I was no longer allowed to touch. The irony cut deep, but I held on to my words. One day he would look inside that pot, and the truth would rise like steam. The first signs of trouble had come right after the wedding. It wasn't just that Tasha wanted to do things her way, it was how she looked at me, like I was an outdated recipe she wanted to rewrite. I remember the first Thanksgiving after they married. I woke up early, just like my mother had, to start the turkey, to mash the yams, to bake the sweet potato pies. But when I arrived at their house, I found Tasha already in the kitchen, the counters covered with strange herbs and tiny bowls of spices that looked nothing like the soul food traditions of our family. She smiled politely but said, "Oh, Deborah, I've already handled it. You can just sit and relax." To some, that might have sounded kind, but to me, it was a dismissal, a quiet eviction from the one space where my identity was strongest. Jordan didn't notice. He kissed her cheek, praised her effort, and told me how proud he was that his wife could cook. I smiled, but deep down, I felt the earth shifting beneath me. As months turned into years, the humiliations piled up like unwashed dishes. I would reach for a pan, only to hear her snap, "Don't touch that." I would offer to make cornbread for Sunday service, and she would whisper loud enough for me to hear, "Nobody eats that greasy stuff anymore." Even the neighbors started noticing. At block parties in our Illinois suburb, people would joke that Tasha's kitchen was a no-fly zone for me. I laughed it off, but every jab left a bruise on my spirit. Jordan, my son, the boy I had raised on faith and casseroles, the man who once called me his queen, now stood back and let it happen. He loved her. I could see that, but love had made him blind, deaf to the slow erosion of respect. And so I waited. Waited with the patience of a woman who knew that truth, like a pot of beans, always rises to the top when the fire gets hot enough. That pot. Lord, that pot had seen it all. It wasn't new or shiny, its black surface bore the scars of decades, each scratch a story, each dent a memory. It was the same pot I'd used when Jordan was sick and I brewed ginger tea to calm his cough. The same pot I filled with chicken soup when the landlord threatened eviction and I had only $5 left. But what nobody knew, not even Jordan, was that inside its hollow base, beneath the lining I had cleverly reinforced years ago, lay something far more valuable than food. I had hidden documents there, deeds to land in Mississippi that my grandmother had left me, savings bonds I had collected over 30 years, and letters my late husband had written before he passed. That pot held the legacy of our bloodline, protection against the storms of life, and a reminder that we came from more than struggle. Tasha thought it was just an old pot. Jordan thought it was just a cooking tool. But one day, when the truth boiled over, they would see it for what it truly was. The key to everything. The day after she threw me out, I stayed in my little bungalow on the other side of town, staring at the snow that blanketed Illinois like a shroud. My phone buzzed with calls from church ladies checking on me, their voices full of sympathy I didn't want. "You know these young women don't value tradition," one said. Another added, "Don't let her take your joy, sis." But I stayed quiet, because how could I explain that it wasn't just about food or space? It was about losing my place in my own son's heart. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, my hands wrapped around the warm mug, thinking about the pot sitting in Tasha's kitchen. Would she scrub it, not knowing what rested inside? Would Jordan ever lift the lid and see beyond the greens and stews? I prayed that day would come soon. Because the storm between us wasn't just about kitchens and pride. It was about secrets buried in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to change everything. By January, the snow in Illinois had turned into thick, gray slush that clung to boots and froze hearts. I visited less often, afraid of another confrontation, but church commitments sometimes pulled me back to their neighborhood. One Sunday afternoon, after service, Jordan insisted I stop by for dinner. I hesitated, but I went. The smell of roasted salmon and asparagus filled the air. Tasha's cooking, of course. When I offered to help set the table, she looked at me with that same tight smile and said, "No, Deborah, guests don't lift a finger." Guests. That word cut like a blade. I wasn't a guest in my son's house. I was his mother, the one who had carried him, prayed over him, and built his future spoonful by spoonful. But I swallowed the bitterness, sat quietly, and bowed my head when they prayed. As we ate, Jordan laughed at one of Tasha's stories, his dimples flashing, the same dimples I used to kiss when he was a boy. My chest tightened. My son was slipping away from me, and the woman across the table knew it. It wasn't just the meals. Tasha found new ways to remind me that I didn't belong. At family gatherings, she would take subtle jabs at me. "We don't use too much salt in this house anymore," she'd say loudly, glancing at me while others chuckled. Or she'd boast about how Jordan loved her new health-conscious recipes, implying that my collard greens and fried chicken were relics of a past better forgotten. One Easter Sunday, in front of the entire family, she said, "Mama, Jordan doesn't understand modern kitchens. She's old school." The room erupted in laughter. I forced a smile, but inside, my heart crumbled. Each word was a chip at the foundation of the respect I had earned through decades of sacrifice. And Jordan? He stayed silent, his eyes fixed on his plate. That silence was worse than the ridicule. Silence from a son who once swore he would defend me against the world. But silence was not the only wound. One evening, Jordan called me and said words I never thought I would hear. "Mama, maybe you should give Tasha some space. She feels like you're interfering." My breath caught in my chest. Interfering? Me, the woman who had raised him alone after his father died in a car accident on an icy Illinois road? Me, the woman who had scrubbed toilets and washed dishes just to keep him in school? I had never asked for much, only to be a part of his life, to sit at the table I helped him build. I wanted to scream, but instead I whispered, "Jordan, one day you'll see. And when you do, I pray it's not too late." He sighed, tired, torn between love for me and loyalty to her. I hung up the phone, tears soaking my pillow that night. For the first time, I wondered if the truth inside that pot would ever come to light, or if it would stay buried under collard greens until the day I died. Still, I held on to the pot like a lifeline. Every time I cooked at my bungalow, I would use another pot, but my eyes always drifted to the old black ones sitting in their kitchen. It was strange, wasn't it? That the very thing meant to preserve our legacy was now trapped in the hands of someone who disrespected me. Sometimes I thought of sneaking into their house to retrieve it, but that would make me no better than the thief Tasha painted me to be. Instead I prayed. Prayed that Jordan's eyes would open. Prayed that God would reveal the truth in his own time. My pastor once said, What's hidden in darkness will always come to light. I clung to that. Because inside that pot were not just documents and bonds. There was also a letter I had written for Jordan years ago. A letter I prayed he would only read when the time was right. A letter that explained everything. Our sacrifices, our history, our worth. The breaking point came on a Sunday in February. The neighborhood was buzzing with talk of the upcoming Black History Month banquet at church, where families would bring dishes that reflected their heritage. I had planned to bring my mother's gumbo recipe, the same gumbo that had warmed our family for generations. But when I mentioned it at dinner, Tasha smirked and said, "We don't need greasy gumbo embarrassing us in front of the community. I'll make a quinoa salad. Something classy." My jaw clenched, but before I could respond she added, "Why don't you just sit this one out, Deborah? You'll be more comfortable that way." Laughter danced on her lips, but Jordan said nothing. I looked at my son, willing him to speak, but he only shifted in his seat. The humiliation was complete. I excused myself from the table, walked out into the cold Illinois night, and whispered to myself, "One day, child, that pot will speak louder than my words ever could." After that February dinner, I stayed away longer than ever. Weeks passed without me stepping foot into their house. At church people noticed. "Where's Sister Deborah?" they asked Jordan and Tasha, but their answers were vague, clipped. I knew my absence was making a statement louder than my presence ever had. And strangely enough, it began to bother Tasha. The very woman who had thrown me out of her kitchen now whispered in Jordan's ear, asking why I wasn't around, why people kept staring at her sideways during service. My name was still in the air even when I wasn't in the room, and that unsettled her. But me? I sat in my bungalow, cooking small meals in silence, always thinking about that pot sitting on her stove. Every now and then, my mind would wander. Did she scrub it clean, not knowing what rested within? Did she curse at its dents and scratches, oblivious to the wealth and history it carried? The thought both terrified and comforted me. For I knew, sooner or later, curiosity always kills pride. She would lift that lid. And when she did, her world would crack open. The tension deepened when Jordan came to visit me alone one evening. He looked tired, his once bright eyes dulled by stress. He sat at my kitchen table, running his hand over the wood the way he used to as a boy. "Mama," he said softly, "what did you mean that day about the pot?" My heart nearly stopped. I had prayed for this moment, but the fear of it arriving too soon gripped me. "Son," I whispered, "that pot is more than what you think. It holds your history. It holds everything I worked for, everything I bled for." His brows furrowed, confusion clouding his face. "It's just a pot, Mama." I reached across the table, my hands covering his. "One day when you are ready, you will lift the lid, and you'll understand why I endured everything." He sighed, shaking his head, torn between love for me and loyalty to her. "Tasha says you're being dramatic," he muttered. I smiled sadly. "Maybe. But drama has a way of being the truth dressed in louder clothes." By March, the whispers in our Illinois neighborhood had grown. At block parties, ladies from church began asking why Tasha never let me cook anymore. "That gumbo of Sister Deborah's could win awards," one said, not knowing she was fanning the flames. Tasha's face flushed whenever anyone mentioned me. Prideful as she was, she hated the idea that I still held influence, that my absence had left a hole her quinoa salads could never fill. One night, she confronted Jordan, her voice sharp enough to slice the quiet. "Your mother is manipulating people. She's making me look bad." Jordan tried to calm her, but seeds of suspicion began sprouting in his mind. He remembered my words, "Look inside the pot," and though he laughed it off in front of her, the thought lingered. What could possibly be in there? Money? Secrets? Memories? That simple pot, once ignored, had become a silent third presence in their marriage, sitting heavy on the stove like an uninvited guest. Then came the day of the church banquet. Tasha had insisted on bringing her roasted salmon and kale dish, but others brought fried catfish, cornbread, ribs, and gumbo, the food of our people. I didn't attend, but later, word reached me that her dish sat untouched while the other tables emptied fast. People whispered that Sister Deborah's absence was felt, that the banquet just wasn't the same without her cooking. Tasha returned home fuming, slamming cabinet doors, her anger spilling into every corner of the house. "Your mother has poisoned people against me," she shouted at Jordan. "They worship her food, her presence, her everything. What about me? What do I have?" Jordan, weary and caught in the crossfire, finally snapped. "Maybe if you showed her some respect, things would be different." His words hung in the air, heavier than the silence that followed. And for the first time, Tasha's eyes drifted toward the old black pot sitting quietly on the stove, as though it held answers she couldn't reach. That night, alone in the kitchen, Tasha's curiosity burned hotter than the oven. She stood over the pot, her red nails tapping against its lid. "What's so special about you?" she muttered, lifting it slightly, only to find the smell of collard greens lingering in its iron walls. But something inside made a faint clinking sound when she shifted it. Not the sound of food, but of something hidden. Her eyes narrowed. She shook it again, the sound repeating like a whisper. Just then, Jordan walked in, his brows furrowed. "What are you doing?" he asked. She jumped, forcing a smile. "Nothing. Just cleaning." But suspicion now burned in his eyes too. He walked past her, lifted the pot himself, and held it in his hands. It was heavier than it should have been. Much heavier. He looked at her, then at the pot, then back again. "What did Mama mean?" he murmured to himself, his voice barely audible. Tasha said nothing, but her heart pounded in her chest. And just like that, the secret I had hidden for decades was one heartbeat away from being uncovered. The silence in that Illinois kitchen was suffocating, heavier than the snow pressing against the windows. Jordan turned the pot slowly in his hands, his jaw clenched, his eyes full of questions that had been simmering for months. Tasha stood near the counter, her arms folded tight across her chest, masking her fear with disdain. "It's just an old pot," she said, her voice sharp, but even she couldn't ignore the weight in his hands. "Mama's been playing with your head." Jordan didn't answer. He set the pot gently on the counter and placed both hands on its lid. His chest rose and fell with the deep breaths of a man about to uncover more than he wanted to know. "If it's just a pot," he said softly, almost to himself, "then why does it feel like the heaviest thing I've ever carried?" His fingers trembled as they gripped the handle, the memory of his mother's words echoing. "One day when you lift that lid, you'll see what a mother's love looks like." The lid creaked as it rose, and a faint metallic clink broke the silence. Inside, wrapped in layers of old cloth, were envelopes, faded documents, and a small wooden box. Tasha gasped. Jordan froze. Slowly, with reverence, he pulled out the envelopes. His eyes widened as he read the first line on a yellowed deed. "Property of Deborah Matthews." He dug deeper, finding savings bonds, banknotes, and certificates. His hands shook as he opened the wooden box. Inside lay gold jewelry, heirlooms passed down from generations, alongside letters written in his father's handwriting, sealed and preserved. One letter lay on top, marked simply, "For my son." Jordan's knees buckled, and he sank into a chair, the document spilling across the table like spilled truth. "All this time," he whispered, "Mama kept this for me?" Tasha's face paled. She reached for one of the envelopes, but Jordan slapped her hand away, his voice trembling with anger. "Don't touch it." The sharpness of his tone startled her. She had never heard him speak with such authority. He tore open the letter addressed to him, his eyes scanning the words written in his mother's delicate hand. "Jordan, if you are reading this, it means you have finally lifted the lid. Everything inside this pot is the legacy of our family, saved for you. When the world mocked us, this pot carried our survival. When we had nothing, I hid away something for your tomorrow. Never forget where you come from, and never let anyone tell you that your mother had nothing to give." Tears blurred his vision. The words were not just ink, They were blood, sweat, and sacrifice. He pressed the letter against his chest, his shoulders shaking. Across from him, Tasha shifted uncomfortably, the arrogance in her posture slipping away. For the first time, shame colored her face. Jordan looked up at his wife, his eyes blazing with fury and heartbreak. "Do you know what you did?" he asked, his voice breaking. "You threw her out of this kitchen that held our history, our survival, our inheritance." He held up the deeds, waving them in front of her. "While you mocked her cornbread, while you laughed at her collard greens, she was preserving our legacy. You said she was old-fashioned, but she was saving us." Tasha's lips trembled. She tried to speak, but no words came. The truth stripped her bare. "You let your pride blind you," Jordan continued. "You tried to erase her, but without her, there would be no me, and no us." His voice cracked on the last word. Tasha's tears finally spilled, rolling down her cheeks, but Jordan turned away. He pressed his face into his hands, the documents scattered across the table like holy scriptures, each one screaming of a mother's love. The confrontation left the house trembling in silence. Jordan sat there for hours, rereading the letters, his tears staining the ink. Tasha knelt beside him eventually, her sobs breaking through the stillness. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice raw. "I thought she was trying to control us. I didn't know she had all this." Jordan lifted his head, his face streaked with tears, and stared at her with eyes she had never seen before, eyes full of disappointment. "You didn't need to know what was in the pot," he said coldly. "You just needed to respect the woman who raised me. That's all." His words sliced deeper than any argument ever could. Tasha bowed her head, her pride in ruins, as Jordan gathered the documents back into the pot. He placed the lid firmly on top, sealing not just the items inside but also the rebuke that would forever haunt her. "This pot," he said quietly, "is proof that my mother is worth more than anything money can buy. And I will never let anyone dishonor her again." The next morning, the Illinois sun rose weakly through frosted windows, casting pale light over the house still heavy with silence. Jordan hadn't slept. He had sat at the table all night, staring at the pot, replaying every memory of his childhood. The time his mother walked miles in snow to bring him soup when he was sick. The nights she worked double shifts, only to come home and cook a hot meal before collapsing. The way she prayed over every bite of food, believing God himself stirred love into each dish. Now the proof of her sacrifices sat in front of him. Deeds, bonds, letters, a lifetime of love hidden in steel. At dawn, Jordan packed the pot carefully, placed it in his car, and drove through the quiet Illinois streets toward his mother's bungalow. His heart thumped with dread and shame, but he knew what had to be done. He had to face her, not just as a son, but as a man who had finally seen the truth. When Deborah opened the door, her face showed surprise first, then caution. Jordan stood there, holding the pot in both hands, his eyes red-rimmed from sleeplessness. "Mama," he whispered, his voice cracking. She stepped aside silently, allowing him in. He set the pot gently on her kitchen table, the same table where he had once eaten cornbread and collard greens as a boy. Then, without warning, he dropped to his knees. "I'm sorry," he choked, tears spilling freely. "I let her disrespect you. I let her push you aside. I forgot who you were, Mama. I forgot what you did for me." Deborah's heart trembled as she reached down, cupping his face in her hands. "Son," she said softly, "you found the truth, didn't you?" He nodded, unable to speak. She pulled him up and held him in her arms, rocking him like the little boy he once was. The kitchen filled with sobs, but they were not sobs of pain. They were the sobs of a bond reforged in fire. Later, as they sat together, Jordan spread the documents across the table. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked. Deborah smiled faintly, her eyes distant with memory. "Because love doesn't always need to speak, son. Sometimes it just waits. That pot was my way of keeping you safe until the world was ready to show you who I really was." She traced her fingers across the old deeds, the bonds, the letters from her late husband. Your father wanted you to inherit more than struggle. I wanted you to know that your bloodline carried strength and dignity, even when life tried to bury us. Jordan's throat tightened. He saw his mother not as the woman Tasha mocked, but as the warrior who had preserved his future in silence. Mama, he said, I'll never let anyone disrespect you again. Not even my wife. Deborah's eyes softened, but her words were gentle. Respect is earned, son, but forgiveness is given. Tasha is young. Pride is heavy. Don't let bitterness destroy your home. That evening, Jordan returned home with the pot. Tasha sat in the living room, her eyes swollen from crying. She rose quickly, rushing to him, but he held up his hand. No, he said firmly. You need to listen first. He told her everything. His childhood, the sacrifices, the nights of hunger, the legacy his mother had hidden inside that pot. Tasha listened in silence, her face pale, her lips trembling. By the time he finished, her tears flowed again, but this time, they were not tears of anger or pride. They were tears of humility. I was wrong, she admitted, her voice breaking. I thought I was protecting my space, but I was destroying something sacred. I mocked what I didn't understand. I hurt you. I hurt her. I don't know if she can ever forgive me. Jordan's eyes softened slightly, but his tone remained stern. Forgiveness is between you and her. But know this, if you ever disrespect my mother again, you won't have a husband left to stand beside you. His words landed like a gavel, final and firm. Tasha bowed her head. The queen of her kitchen reduced to a student of humility. In the weeks that followed, change bloomed slowly, like spring breaking through Illinois frost. Tasha invited Deborah back, not with arrogance, but with trembling hands that offered an apology. At first, Deborah was cautious, but eventually she accepted. One Sunday, they cooked together. Collard greens simmering beside roasted salmon, cornbread beside quinoa salad. The kitchen no longer felt like a battlefield but like a bridge, tentative but hopeful. Neighbors whispered about the reconciliation, and the church rejoiced when they saw the family together again. Yet the greatest change was within Jordan. He no longer stayed silent. He defended his mother openly, praised her openly, and carried the pot like a crown jewel of their legacy. As for Deborah, she smiled more, her dignity restored. And though scars remained, they became reminders of the lessons learned. That pride can blind, silence can wound, but truth hidden in a simple pot, can heal generations. The story ended not with bitterness, but with a kitchen full of aromas, laughter, and the unshakable bond between a mother and her son. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it.